Welcome back to more Pikmin 3 Deluxe. Last time we finished Olimar's comeback, so this time we're trying out mission mode. We have 3 mission types to choose from, so let's start with Collect Treasure. 5 stages are unlocked by default, so let's head to the Tropical Forest. For this mission, we have 7 minutes to collect as much as possible around this area. Obviously, this mission type was the basis for the Collect Fruits and Treasures missions from the side stories, but there is one key difference. We also have to carry back the enemies in most cases, with some exceptions, like this iridescent flint beetle. As a heads up, I won't be going through every mission for this playthrough. I'm simply going to highlight one of each type. The main reason for this is, I feel like I'm not the best person to demonstrate these missions, because truth be told, I have never been able to get all of the platinums in either version of this game. I fully admit it's a bit of a skill issue, or as the Pikmin community calls it, a Dandori issue quite literally, because I don't multitask enough in these games to actually be efficient enough to get the platinum times. These are the strictest missions in the entirety of Pikmin 3. So if you thought the main game and the side stories were too easy, I definitely recommend going for the platinum medals, because they are quite challenging later on. This mission isn't too bad though, given that we only have one captain to worry about. In 2-player, Brittany will be the second player character, and also speaking of which, this was the only mode in the Wii U version that had co-op. So I definitely feel like a lot of these missions were tailored around that, and as a result, would be a lot more approachable and fun with a second player. As is, in single player, you have to do a lot of multitasking to get everything done in time. Though Pikmin 3 Deluxe also adds an additional feature where if you don't collect everything, you can keep playing past the time limit in order to practice and scout out the area, so I think that's a really great addition. First things first, I want to clear out the enemies here because we'll be splitting up the Pikmin for the most part, and we definitely want to deal with the enemies while we have a full squad. We also want to get started on a lot of the larger tasks of the day, mainly collecting the gold, given that that is one of the most time-consuming parts of this mission. In general though, this one isn't too bad. I feel like 2-player, for example, would kind of trivialize this one, but even as early as Mission 2 for Collect Treasure, things heat up very quickly and will get very unforgiving. Another thing worth mentioning is, in the Wii U version, there were only 5 missions by default. The other missions were actually DLC. For example, Row 2 for Collect Treasure was DLC Pack 1, and Row 2 for the next mode, Battle Enemies, was Pack 2. Pack 3 added 5 more missions for both modes. Interestingly enough, I feel like these missions are actually a little bit more interesting than some of the side stories because they are a lot more challenging, and in some cases make the side stories feel a little bit more redundant. For example, we'll get to this later, but the second row for the Battle Enemies mode is actually different than for this mode. For this mode, the second row are actually remixes of the first row stages. In general though, I do recommend playing through these modes. Pikmin 3 Deluxe does include all of the DLC by default, which is very nice, and the third row especially, which again is shared by both Battle Enemies and Collect Treasure, contains some really clever stages. A personal favorite of mine is actually a pseudo-remake of the Forest Naval from Pikmin 1, which is fantastic to see, given that that was the only stage that didn't return in Pikmin 2 in terms of reused areas. You also have to remember to get these fruits over here by the entrance of the area, given that they're kind of tucked away behind the crystals, and we also have this little lemon over here. We also have to carry back the Medusal Slurker, and from here, we should be getting pretty close to the end. We'll carry the Bulborb here, and also have our remaining Pikmin work on something else. I feel like not many Pikmin actually charged at that, so we'll toss a few more. Next up, we have to round up the red Pikmin, because we also have to deal with some pyroclasmic slooches guarding the final treasures of this area. Again, this one isn't too bad, but even with the 7-minute time limit and the relatively easygoing first mission, it's still surprisingly tight in terms of the time limit. Also worth mentioning is, this was actually one of the first areas shown off in Pikmin 3. This was used as a demo at E3 2012, if I'm not mistaken. It's a very good intro level given that you only have one captain to worry about, so you don't get as overwhelmed as with some of the later stages, and also I feel like, especially at the time, this would have been a good game to demo at an event because of the inclusion of the Wii U gamepad, which obviously would have been a novel concept, having menu information on the other screen. In general, I do feel like the original was one of the better uses of the gamepad, but again, I don't really miss it in this version, to be honest. I definitely feel like it's perfectly playable without it. But with that being said, we're actually getting close to the end of the mission. I actually don't know quite how much is left here. I'm pretty sure it's just these final collectibles here and the last pieces of gold. So with that, I think we're just about done with this mission. Next up is Battle Enemies. Once again, we have 5 stages to choose from, so I think we'll return to the Tropical Forest. This time we have 7 minutes to clear out as many enemies as possible within the area. In general, I find it easier to get the Platinum medals in the Battle Enemies missions in comparison to the Collect Treasure missions. I feel like it has to do with not having to carry back as much, though in this case, we will collect a few of the enemies since we do have a Baldy Longlegs to fight in a bit. Once we're done with this, we'll swap over to Alf and deal with some enemies with the red Pikmin, but first, we also want to take out the Dwarf Bulborbs here that'll get in the way as we try to fight the Baldy Longlegs. Let's swap over as soon as we leave Brittany by the Onion, and then we'll deal with the enemies over here. Luckily, we do have a Bomb Rock to take out the Bulborb, and there's also a Crystal Wall, but I don't recommend using a Bomb Rock on this, because I'd rather save the other Bomb Rock for something else in case something goes wrong. Ideally, we won't need it, but it is good in an emergency. We also have quite a few Spectralids and a Swooping Snitch Bug. In general, flying enemies can actually be really annoying in this mode, not because they're difficult to defeat, but because they end up wasting a lot of time. We specifically want to take out the red Spectralid as quickly as possible, because this one always drops an Ultra Spicy Spray that'll come in handy when we fight the Baldy Longlegs. We also want to quickly run over here and take out the final Spectralid in this area, and then we'll swap over to Brittany to deal with the Longlegs. While we wait for it to come over here, I did want to mention that the second row of missions in this mode consists of remixes of the main areas from the story mode, rather than remixes of the mission mode areas. They tend to be very challenging missions, and also further trivialize the side stories and the reuse of areas, given that we already have very difficult Battle Enemies missions in areas like the Tropical Wilds and the Garden of Hope. If we can defeat the Baldy Longlegs before it actually makes it up to this ledge over here, we will get a ton of Bomb Rocks, making it easier to get through the Bulborbs later on. It can be very difficult because of the elevation, but luckily we were able to get through it, no problem, and we have plenty of Bomb Rocks to deal with the remaining large threats in the area, along with this wall over here. If this doesn't work out, you can use the Bomb Rock by the red Bulborb to take out these Bulborbs because there is a geyser to get Alf up to this area, so you can actually defeat those really easily and get the Bomb Rocks past them. We also have more Spectralids over here to deal with. Again, we want to wait for them to land because trying to hit them in midair can be very frustrating and can end up wasting a lot of time. But with that taken care of, we only have a few more enemies to deal with, and we have 2 more Bomb Rocks left, and luckily we do have 2 more Bulborbs, so we won't have to worry about that extra Bomb Rock. Obviously, fighting all of these enemies close together is a bit scary. We especially don't want the Pikmin with the Bomb Rock to get grabbed by the Snitch Bug, so we'll prioritize the Dwarf Orange Bulborbs so they won't get in the way. So we'll finish off this enemy here, and then use the Bomb Rocks to take out the remaining large Bulborbs. Again, yellow Pikmin aren't the best at fighting, so it can be a little bit tricky to take out enemies like this, but it will be a little bit faster than going back for the red Pikmin in the other area. With that taken care of, we have the orange Bulborb over here, so we'll toss a Bomb Rock here, and then we'll use our final Bomb Rock to hopefully take out the remaining Bulborbs. If not, we can always toss a Pikmin to take out the stray Dwarf Bulborb over there. The final mission type is Defeat Bosses. To demonstrate this, we'll rematch the Armored Crawmad. We have 8 minutes to defeat the Armored Crawmad, or 2 minutes for the Platinum Medal. One thing that's worth mentioning is, like the side stories, the mission mode difficulty in Deluxe is generally set to the normal difficulty, so these tend to be a bit easier than they were in the Wii U version. It doesn't matter as much in the Defeat Bosses missions, given that you'll often run into damage caps anyway, but it does make the other 2 mission types a bit more accessible. It's also worth mentioning that in every mission, you have access to the Dodge Whistle, so we can actually use it to very easily dodge its final charge, and hopefully finish it off. So that was a quick look at the mission mode types. Next up, I wanted to go over Bingo Battle. One nice thing about every multiplayer mode in Pikmin 3 Deluxe is you can actually use standalone Joy-Cons, though I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, because as you might guess, whoever is using a Joy-Con won't have access to certain features like manual camera control. There are 12 stages in total, but only one is unlocked by default, so let's head to the Shaded Terrace. We also have several rule sets to choose from, including having a Victory Macaroon as a win condition. We can also choose between having 1 or 2 captains per player, and if you keep selecting this option, you can switch between Charlie and Brittany for player 1. We can also set the starting number of Pikmin for each player, which essentially works like a handicap setting. Alright, let's give this a try. In a lot of ways, this feels like an expanded version of Pikmin 2's battle mode. In that game, the goal is to collect 4 of 7 yellow marbles before your opponent. In this case, we have 10 possible combinations of enemies and items that will give us a bingo, so by comparison, there's a lot more to keep track of. Also in Pikmin 2, each player had a special marble by their onion. If you took your opponent's marble back to your onion, you'd automatically win. And the Victory Macaroon works the same way, though in this case, it's actually an optional rule set that you can disable. You will also win if your opponent loses all of their Pikmin, or if they lose a single captain. It doesn't matter if you're playing with more than one captain, you only have to take out one captain to win. Also, like in Pikmin 2, you can occasionally find Cupid's grenades that will give you various power-ups. You can store up to 5 at a time, and they have various effects that will help you, like giving you an ultra spicy spray, or returning your victory macaroon to your onion, or harmful effects to your opponent, like dropping boulders on them, or warping them to random locations to throw them off. If one person is really far ahead, special items can appear by the other player's onion. These include a golden Cupid's grenade that will give you up to 5 items at once, depending on how many empty slots you have, and a lucky marble that will randomly fill a spot on your bingo card. In general, this mode is actually really well liked for how strategic it is. Given that there are so many permutations that will give you a win, you have to keep track of a lot, both for what you need and also what your opponent needs. For example, if you can tell what your opponent is going after, you might want to go out of your way to get it first, just to sabotage them essentially. This is both a good thing because it's very strategic, but it's also a bad thing because it does limit how you can actually play this mode. This is local only in both versions of the game, and specifically, it's actually split screen only. Even in the Wii U version, there's no option to have one person on the gamepad screen and the other person on the TV screen, because whoever's on the gamepad screen will be able to look at what your opponent is doing and get an advantage. It definitely feels like this mode was built with split screen in mind, and specifically, screen looking in mind, because that's part of the strategy, being able to figure out what your opponent needs and deciding whether it's worth going out of your way to grab it first, or if it's better to just focus on what you need. So again, it's a very interesting mode, but unfortunately, because it is offline only, I've actually never been able to play it as intended, though I do admit I see the appeal of this mode, and hopefully someday I'll be able to play it with another person. But with that being said, we only need one more item with Alf's team, so let's finish up this match. In addition to the 12 main stages, each stage also will cycle through 3 variants every time you pick it, so there's also a lot of stage variety. In general, this is considered one of the best battle modes in the series so far, and I can definitely see why, again, even if I've never experienced it as intended. But that was a quick overview of Bingo Battle. Finally, I wanted to highlight the badges that we didn't get throughout this playthrough. You can access your badges at any time through the pause menu. Here we have a list view, but you can also organize them by category, and you're also given a title depending on how many you have. Starting with the story mode badges, we're only missing one, Pikmin Master, for clearing the game again on the ultra spicy difficulty. We have all of the side stories badges, so next up is the mission mode. We're missing Game Hunter, Treasure Hunter, and Big Game Hunter, which are for getting at least a bronze in every stage in each mode, and Dedicated Adventurer for getting 10 platinums across all 3 modes. This is actually surprisingly generous, given that you only need 10 platinums out of the 36 available missions, so it's surprisingly doable even as someone who struggles a lot with specific missions. With Bingo Battle, we have Gadget Master for using 10 items, Bingo Buff for playing 10 rounds, and Bingo Fiend for playing every stage at least once. To be honest, I feel like Bingo Buff is a bit redundant, given that you'll have to play this mode 10 times in order to play every stage. Finally, we have dedicated badges. Here we have Mission Partner, Sidekick, and Buddy System for playing the story mode, mission mode, and side stories at least once in co-op. Again, the multiplayer achievements are surprisingly easy to get because you can simply hook up a separate Joy-Con if you don't have a Switch Lite. With that, we've reached the end of Pikmin 3 Deluxe. Again, this was one of my favorite games for the Wii U, and in general, this is probably one of my favorite Nintendo series. To be honest, I don't think there's ever been a better time to get into the series, now that all 4 mainline games are available on Switch, and 3 Deluxe and 4 specifically also have demos where you can transfer your save files to the full releases, if you decide to pick them up later. I highly recommend these games, and in general, it was a lot of fun revisiting this one. I'm not sure if I'll ever go through Pikmin 4, it's a very different game from the others, and it's a bit overwhelming to be honest, so I won't promise anything for now, but maybe someday we'll revisit PNF 404. But with that being said, thank you for watching, and I hope you'll join me next time for something different.